The woman stumbled into his camp like a ghost made flesh, her dress torn to ribbons, blood streaking down her arms in dark rivulets. Jake Morrison had been nursing his coffee by the dying fire when she appeared at the edge of the firelight, swaying on her feet like a cottonwood in a storm. "Just shoot me," she whispered, her voice raw as sandpaper. "Please." Jake's hand went to his coat, but he didn't draw. Something in her eyes stopped him cold. Not madness, not fear, but a kind of exhausted resignation that cut deeper than any scream. She held her hands out, palms up, showing him the rope burns that had carved deep grooves into her wrists. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. That's when he saw them. In the darkness beyond her, shapes moved like shadows given form. At first Jake thought it was the wind playing tricks with the brush. Then the moonlight caught something that made his blood freeze in his veins. Eyes, dozens of them, reflecting the dim starlight like scattered coins in a well. The woman took another step forward, and Jake could see her face clearly now. Pretty once, maybe beautiful, but something had hollowed her out from the inside. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles, and there was a strange mark on her forehead, 3 parallel scratches that looked fresh. "They won't let me die," she said, her voice breaking. "I've tried, God help me, I've tried everything." The shapes behind her grew bolder, creeping closer to the firelight. Jake caught glimpses of what might have been faces, but they shifted and blurred whenever he tried to focus on them. The air grew thick with the smell of sage and something else, something that reminded him of the cellar back home where his mother used to store the winter meat. His horse Ranger snorted and pulled against his tether, ears pinned back flat against his skull. Animals knew things, men tried to forget. Jake's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against a stone. The sound seemed to echo longer than it should have in the vast emptiness of the desert night. The woman was crying now, but no tears fell. "They follow me everywhere. They whisper things, terrible things about what I've done." Jake's mouth went dry. Behind her, the shadows writhed like smoke given substance, and he could swear he heard voices, not words exactly, but the rhythm of voices, rising and falling like a hymn sung in a language that predated scripture. Jake had seen enough death to know it when it looked him in the eye. This woman was already gone in every way that mattered, but her body just hadn't gotten the message yet. The smart thing would be to mount up and ride hard until dawn painted the eastern sky. The decent thing, well, that was harder to pin down. "What's your name?" he asked instead of reaching for his gun. "Sarah." The word came out like a prayer. "Sarah Whitmore. I lived in Perdition Ridge until..." She gestured weakly at the writhing darkness behind her. "Until I didn't." Jake knew Perdition Ridge, a mining town that had dried up and blown away 3 summers back when the silver played out. He'd ridden through there once, found nothing but empty buildings and wind. No people, no graves, just nothing. "Sarah," he said carefully, "there ain't been nobody in Perdition Ridge for years." Her laugh was the sound of breaking glass. "Time moves different when you're dead, cowboy. Days feel like years and years pass like heartbeats." She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I killed them, all of them. The whole town." The shadows behind her grew restless, pressing closer. Jake could make out more details now: tattered clothing, faces that seemed to melt and reform like candle wax, hands that reached towards Sarah with a desperate hunger. They whispered her name in voices like wind through dry bones. "How?" The word escaped before Jake could stop it. "Poison in the well." Sarah's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. "My husband, he used to hurt me, hurt our daughter too. The whole town knew, but nobody did nothing. They just looked the other way when he'd beat us bloody, said it was a man's right to discipline his family." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd known men like that. Hell, he'd killed men like that. "So you poisoned the whole town." "I only meant to poison him." Her voice cracked. "But the water table, it spread to everyone. Children, babies, the preacher's wife who used to sneak me food when Thomas locked us in the cellar. They all died screaming, and it was my fault." The shapes behind her moaned, a sound like wind through a cemetery. They pressed closer, and Sarah turned to face them, her shoulders straightening for the first time since she'd stumbled into his camp. "I know," she told them. "I know what I did. I know I deserve this." When she turned back to Jake, her eyes held a desperate hope that cut him deeper than any blade. "But maybe you can end it. Maybe if someone decent pulls that trigger." A sound echoed across the desert, hoofbeats, coming fast and hard from the east. Jake squinted into the darkness and saw them, 3 riders pushing their horses at a killing pace, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. But even at this distance, he could see the ropes coiled at their saddles and the way they sat their mounts, like men with ugly business to finish. The riders thundered into the camp with guns drawn, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground. Jake's hand dropped to his Colt, but he didn't clear leather, not yet. The lead rider was a giant of a man with shoulders like a barn door and a star pinned to his vest that caught the firelight. "Sheriff Marcus Tate," the big man announced, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years wearing a badge. "Step away from the woman, Cowboy." Jake glanced at Sarah. She'd gone pale as moonlight, backing toward the fire with her hands raised. Behind her, the shadows writhed and whispered, but the 3 lawmen didn't seem to notice them at all. "She's not armed," Jake said carefully. "Just looks like she needs help." Tate's laugh was ugly. "Help, son? This woman's been dead for 3 years. What you're looking at ain't natural." He spat into the dirt. "Sarah Whitmore poisoned half of Arizona territory before we caught up to her outside Tucson, hanged her proper like from a cottonwood tree." The second rider, a wiry man with cold eyes, nodded toward Sarah. "Rope snapped her neck clean through. I saw it myself, but the devil don't like to give up his own, apparently." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The rope broke. I felt myself dying, felt everything going dark, but then I woke up on the ground with these things around me." She gestured at the writhing shadows. "The people I killed. They won't let me rest." Thunder rumbled overhead, though the sky had been clear moments before. The wind picked up, whipping dust and sagebrush around the camp. Jake's fire flickered and nearly died, casting dancing shadows that seemed to merge with the supernatural darkness surrounding Sarah. "Don't matter what kind of curse follows her," Tate said, dismounting with his gun trained on Sarah. "Law's the law even when it comes to the walking dead. We got orders to bring her back to Perdition Ridge, put her in the ground permanent like." In Perdition Ridge, Jake's blood went cold. "But that whole town burned to the ground last week," the third rider interrupted. "Some drifter found evidence of what she done. The territorial governor wants to make an example, show folks that justice don't end with death." The shadows behind Sarah suddenly surged forward, and for a moment Jake could see them clearly. Men, women, children, all bearing the twisted features of poison victims. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, their eyes burned with an unholy fire, and their hands reached for Sarah with desperate, grasping fingers. Sarah stumbled backward, right into Sheriff Tate's arms. He wrapped a thick rope around her wrists, and she didn't resist. "You feel that?" she asked Jake, her eyes locked on his. "The cold? That's what death feels like when it won't let you go." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the camp in harsh white light. In that brief moment, Jake saw something that made his heart skip. The shadows weren't just following Sarah, they were protecting her, standing between her and the lawman, like a wall of restless souls. "Sheriff," Jake said slowly, "I don't think you understand what you're dealing with here." Tate's smile was cold as winter steel. "I understand plenty, Cowboy. I understand that some sins are too big for just one death to wash clean." The storm that had been threatening finally broke, sending sheets of rain across the desert floor. The 3 lawmen huddled under their slickers, while Sarah stood motionless in the downpour, the water running through her like she was made of smoke. Jake watched her from beneath his hat brim, noting how the rain seemed to pass right through the shadows that surrounded her too. Sheriff Tate had tied Sarah to a scraggly mesquite tree, but she wasn't fighting the bonds. If anything, she looked almost peaceful for the first time since stumbling into his camp. The ghosts, for that's what they had to be, pressed close around her, their spectral forms barely visible in the driving rain. "Why?" Jake found himself asking, raising his voice over the thunder. Why did you really do it? Sarah lifted her head, water streaming from her dark hair. You want the truth? My daughter, Emma, she was only 8 years old. My husband, her voice broke. He did things to her, horrible things, and when I tried to stop him, he said he'd kill us both. One of the deputies, the cold-eyed man, spat. So you murdered a whole town, children who never hurt nobody. I was desperate. Sarah's composure cracked, and for a moment the shadows around her grew agitated, pressing closer. I put the poison in our well, just ours. I didn't know the water table connected to the town supply. I didn't know. Jake looked at the ghosts surrounding her, and suddenly he understood. These weren't just victims, they were witnesses. In their translucent faces, he could see not anger, but a profound sadness. They weren't tormenting Sarah out of hatred, they were mourning with her. Where's your daughter now? He asked quietly. Sarah's shoulders shook. She was the first to drink the water, came running home from school, thirsty from playing in the sun. Sarah doubled over, and the sound that came from her throat was barely human. She died in my arms, asking why it hurt so much, asking why Mama couldn't make it better. The rain began to ease, and in the relative quiet, Jake could hear something else, soft weeping, coming from the shadows around Sarah. The ghosts were crying, their spectral tears mixing with the earthly rain. Sheriff Tate shifted uncomfortably. Don't matter the reason, murder's murder, is it? Jake found himself standing, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on his Colt's grip. She was protecting her child. Any parent would. Any parent wouldn't poison a whole town. The wiry deputy interrupted, but Jake was looking at Sarah's face, seeing something the lawman had missed. Around her neck, barely visible beneath her torn dress, hung a small locket. It had fallen open, revealing a tiny photograph, a little girl with Sarah's eyes, and an innocent smile. She carries her daughter's picture, Jake said softly. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time he saw hope flicker in her dead eyes. You see it? Most people can't see it anymore. Jake nodded. The locket seemed to pulse with a faint warm light that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold emanating from the other spirits. This was different. This was love, pure and undying. She forgives you, Jake said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Your daughter, she forgives you. The shadows around Sarah suddenly stilled, and one shape, smaller than the others, with the outline of a child, stepped forward. Jake could barely make out her features, but he could feel her presence like warm sunlight after a cold rain. The ghost child moved toward her mother with steps that made no sound on the wet earth. As she drew closer, the other spirits began to fade, their forms becoming translucent, then dissolving entirely into the morning mist. Only Sarah and her daughter remained, mother and child separated by death, but bound by something stronger. Emma, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The little girl reached out with spectral hands, and when she touched her mother's face, Sarah's entire body seemed to glow with a soft golden light. The rope around her wrists fell away, not cut but simply released. Sheriff Tate stepped forward, his gun raised, but Jake moved faster, not to draw his own weapon, but to place himself between the lawman and the reunion unfolding before them. Let it be, Jake said quietly. This ain't about law anymore. I've been so sorry, baby, Sarah sobbed, reaching for her daughter. So sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt you. The child's voice came like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I know, Mama. I've always known. As mother and child embraced, something miraculous happened. The supernatural cold that had surrounded Sarah began to warm, and the darkness that clung to her like a shroud started to lift. The marks on her wrists, the scratches on her forehead, even the hollow look in her eyes, all of it began to fade. She's been carrying this guilt for 3 years, Jake realized aloud. The other spirits, they weren't tormenting her, they were waiting for what? Tate demanded, but his voice had lost its harsh edge. For her to forgive herself, Jake said. For her to understand that love sometimes drives us to desperate acts, and that desperation don't make us monsters.
The light around Sarah and her daughter grew brighter, and Jake could see other figures beginning to materialize around them, the ghosts of Perdition Ridge, but changed now. Their faces held peace instead of anguish, understanding instead of accusation. One by one they stepped forward to touch Sarah's hands, her shoulders, her face. Each touch brought forgiveness, and with each act of mercy, they themselves grew more solid, more real, more at peace. "Go on, Mama," little Emma whispered. "It's time." Sarah looked up at Jake one last time, and her eyes were clear and bright and fully alive. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me as human instead of monster." The golden light intensified, and when it faded, the camp was empty, except for Jake and the three lawmen. The rain had stopped completely, and the first rays of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Sheriff Tate holstered his weapon slowly, looking around at the empty space where Sarah had stood. "I've been a lawman for 20 years, he said quietly. "Never seen anything like that." Jake nodded, understanding. Some things couldn't be solved with bullets or rope. Some things required mercy instead of justice, forgiveness instead of punishment. Years later, when people asked Jake Morrison about that night in the desert, he'd tell them about the woman who poisoned a town out of love and desperation, and how sometimes the dead need permission to rest more than they need judgment. He'd tell them about the sound a mother makes when she finally holds her child again, and how forgiveness can shine brighter than any earthly light. But mostly, he'd remember the way the desert looked at dawn after the storm passed, clean and new and full of infinite possibility, like the whole world had been washed fresh and given another chance to get things right. The end always comes, he learned, but sometimes, if you're lucky and brave and willing to see past the darkness to the human heart beneath, the end can also be a beginning.